Hello, welcome again to the Work Design course. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about diagrams. Diagrams are important because they are a graphic representation of a process and can represent a lot of things, such as flow, sequence, or the relation between man and machine. The first, first of all, let me review the type of diagrams that we are going to be reviewing today, and those are flowchart, process diagram, process flow diagram, the path diagram, the man machine and group process diagram, and the bimanual diagram. And we're not going to review them in this order, but we're going to start with the path diagram. First of all, a path diagram is a diagram or model that shows the place where certain activities or process are carried out and the path followed by the workers, materials, or equipment involved in the executions. So there are two main goals in a path diagram: to represent the place, how the place looks like, not exactly as in real life, but just to get an idea of the distribution, and the path following, the sequence that we need to follow in order to accomplish the goal of the process. It allows us to visualize the transports and the plant of the facilities, to be able to analyze if it is possible to eliminate them, reduce the number of transports or the distance, that are the two of the main goals of a path. Not so many movements, or reduce the distance between those movements. In most cases, actual measurements are used to make a scale diagram to represent in a scale between the real life process and the diagram. Our goal is to determine and eliminate or decrease setbacks, displacements, and the points of accumulation of traffic. Here is an example of a path diagram that also represents a little bit of flow, because if you look in the icons, in the symbols, you can see that we have operations, inspections, and transport. So we can combine any type of diagrams that help us to better understand the process that we are representing. So here's a different areas, different process. There's a blue process, a green process, a purple process, and we can see that it starts in sequence with the numbers, and it starts here in some process. Then there's a transport, then there's an operation, there's an inspection, and finally there's a warehouse. Then in the blue process, we start with a transport, then our two operations. Uh, we continue through operation 2 until operation 8, and then an inspection. And finally, in the purple process, we start with 3 operations, then a transport, then 2 operations, 2 more operations, then an inspection, then a transportation, and it unites itself with the green process in the 3rd operation. So to better understand this process, we need to understand the areas where they took place and the specific operations. It's not this process is not for understanding the specifics of the process, but to understand the process as a whole, where it took place and the sequence. So if we need to understand what is this, what represents this transportation or this specific operation, it would be better to add that information to this diagram, or to make a flow chart, or an operation process. So this is an example of a path diagram, where we see the sequence of the operations, the different areas. okay, that participate in the process. Now we're going to talk about the process diagram. A process diagram is a diagram that represents a general picture of how only the main operations and inspections occur. So if we see here, we have, this is an example of an process diagram. We have 3 lines of documentation. Each line represents a part of the product, of the final product. And there are, as I already told, uh, three lines for 3 different products, but the one in the right is the main process because it's where all the other process goes to. So for example, we have product number 1 that has 2 operations, and then it assembles with the main product. We have an product number 2 called Aleta that has some operations and then goes to the main line, to the main product, and the main product that has 3 operations, and then it assembles with the other 2 products. How to make it? First of all, the diagrams will be with the entry of materials. That is represented by a horizontal line where the characteristics of the material must be described. Such an example of here is some flour. So there are 10 kilograms, then some eggs, 10 units. That's the kind of specifications that we need to put into the diagram. To the right of the horizontal line, inputs or materials, a vertical line should start down, uh, in which the symbols of the activities of a process will be located, such as this right here that represents an operation. As I already mentioned, there is a main line uh, that corresponds to the most important component of the part of the product. So if we are doing an assembly line, there is we need to analyze first of all the process in order to better diagram it. So first of all, we need to choose which is going to be the main line and what part of the product we are going to be following, and the others are going to be representing in the secondary lines. And most of the time, this line has the highest number of activities. That's an easy way to identify it. Now, that was the process diagram. Now we are going to analyze the flow chart that we already analyzed in the last video. So we are going to give just a fast review of it. So we got a set of symbols and the representation of it, operations, inspections, transports, delays that we cannot eliminate, the permanent storage, and combined activities. Here's an example of how it looks like. It's kind of a table where in the upper part we have the identification of the process, the department, when it was documented, the number of the diagram, the name of the process, the type of the diagram, if it represents material, if it's or the worker, if it's the actual process or one what we are proposing. And then I'm going to analyze the bottom part of the diagram, and then I'm going to go to this part in the right. So there's a description of activities, and then here is every symbol. So according to the description, we just put an X on the type of symbol. This column is for the distance. If it's a transport, for example, what's the distance of the transportation, the time that it takes, and some observations that you'll need to make in order to better understand the description. And in this part right here, it's a review of the process. How many operations, how much time that it takes, how many transports, the delays, the inspections, the storage, the total distance, and the total time. So it's a sum of a summary of all the informations that we have in the bottom part of the process. So we need to identify the process. We need to show the flow of the process, the type of activities, the distance, the time, some observations, and here is a summary of all the process. It is also important to represent if this is the actual process of an improvement of that actual process. For for us to be able to make an improvement, we need to analyze the summary to identify if there are some delays or there are some transportations that we can eliminate and make the process better in time in terms of time of making it more fast. Now we're going to review the bimanual diagram. And first of all, let me talk to you about a little bit about the Gilbreth. This is a married couple that analyze processes, and they went into the specifics of a process. They wanted to understand not the whole activity, but the specific activity. What I'm trying to say is they divided an activity into movements, and they identify those types of movements. So there are 8 movements that they identify them as effective movements. And those are reaching, that it's the movement of the hand with nothing on it to look for a product. So we are reaching something. I'm going to reach, you're not going to see it, but I'm going to reach for a pen. So in that reaching and in that movement, there are 3 parts. The reaching parts where my hands goes to the pen, then the taking of the product, in this case, the pen, and then the movement that I can make so I can put it in other place. That's just an example of how the Therblix, these movements look like. Reaching, moving, taking, preposition it, using, assemble it, and disassembling. Those are the 8 effective movements. And there is also the part of putting the product. But there are not effective Therblix. So we need to identify them. So when we are performing this type of method study, to eliminate them, like searching. Searching is a non-effective Therblick because you need to have all the products that you are going to need in your visual area. So you can fast identify where the product is. So if you took a lot of time searching, that's ineffective. Selectioning. So if you need to identify which of these 3 prints you are going to use, you need to be more specific and just leave one of them in your area, so you don't need to identify it. Positioning is like when something it takes time for you to make an assembly. That's the positioning. So the assembles need to be fast and easy. The inspections of products, if you are just looking around, not searching, but just trying to identify your area, that's also not effective Therblick. And a delay that you can that you cannot do, the resting part, and fatigue by holding a product in your hands. Those are non-effective movements that you need to identify in a bimanual diagram. In a bimanual diagram, as we see in this example, there are some identification of the operations, and there is a part for the left hand and there is a part for the right hand. We specify the activity, the letters that represent each of the activities of the movements in this specific diagram. Is better to call them movements. So the symbol, in this case, the letters that represent the movement. For example, if you are reaching, in Spanish, it's AL, the symbol. Then you need to specify the time. And there is kind of a ruler here. This column represents the time. So if it says here that it's 1 second that it takes to, in this case, the movement needs taking a product, then this column right here represents the 1 second. If it's 120, like in the second movement, then this column need to be a little longer. And of course, this is holding, so there is 11.2 seconds. Then this line, it's also it's bigger. And this is just the analysis of what the left hand is doing. Then there is the analysis of what the right hand is doing. And there is also the identification or description of the movement, the symbol, and the time. Here's a main machine diagram. And a main machine diagram, it's kind of like the bimanual, but you are working with the worker or the operator and the machine, and what the operator is doing and what the machine is doing and the time that it takes. But here we do not write down the time, but we just use the length of the figure right here of the operation to represent the time. And the time is the first column that we have right here. And it's a graphic representation of the sequence of elements that make up the operations in which men and machines intervene and allow us to know the time spent on each of them. For example, in this analysis, there is an operation performed by the worker. Then there is an operation by the machine. So the worker here, this empty spot represents that the operator or the worker has a delay and cannot eliminate that delay, because it has to wait for the machine so it can continue the sequence of activities that needs to perform. Then there is another activity performed by the machine, and so on. So it gives us the relation between the worker and the machine to identify specific opportunities for this worker to do something else in other machines. Okay. So when we diagram our processes, it's because we are making a method study. And remember, as we saw in the last video, we perform method study and measurement of work to increase our productivity. So we need to measure our work, and that's why we are going to analyze time in a set of operations. But first of all, what is time study? It's a technique that determines as accurately as possible the time required to carry out a certain time. And let me talk to you a little bit about this. Of course, the part of accurately as possible. It's because we are going to make a statistical study of a set of data that represents the time that it takes for an operator or a machine to perform an activity. And we're looking to determine is the standard time that we can analyze to uh, to see if we can improve those processes. So we need to have a standard time so we can better determine how many products we are going to produce in a day or in a month or in a year. And we can have, so we can have a exact amount of those products or even services. The ultimate goal of the study of times, it's to obtain this standard time of the operation. How is it done? First of all, we need a preparation phase, then an execution of the time study, an assessment of that time study, the defining of some supplements that we are observing, and finally, the determination or the definition of the standard time. What is the preparation part? First of all, we need to validate the operation. We need to know from the worker, we need to know its average skill, its cooperation and teamwork, its temperament, its his or her experience. So we need first of all, we need to observe the process in order to identify all of this. And we need an standard working method to define if it's the established method that we are analyzing in order to improve it. In the execution part, that was the preparation part. The execution part is record the operation information, the division of the operations into element, and the definition of time. So for recording the operation, we need flowcharts, process diagrams, man-machine diagrams, bimanual diagrams. That's why we need first to observe the process in general to define what will be the best diagram to choose so it can represent the process in order to improve it. We need to identify the start and the end of the operation, must be defined specifically. It's very important to know when the process starts and when the process ends, and not take it as granted. You must validate that the work method is already standardized or the operator has already passed his learning curve. It's very important of that, and we're going to talk about that concept of learning curve. And the activity that we are going to perform this week has to do with not only the establishing of the diagrams, but also with the definition of this learning curve. But when we are doing it in real life, in a real process, we need to identify that all the workers that we are going to be measuring has passed their learning curve. So in this execution, first of all, we need to define how much data do I need for a study of times. When I say times, it means that I'm going to measure this time with a chronometer or so. So how many cycles are to be timed? If the cycles are of less than 2 minutes, then we need 10 readings. 10 readings is enough. If the cycles are more than 2 minutes, then we need 5 readings. There is a consideration here. There is more reliability in larger time than in very short times where the probability of error can increase. Okay? And then we need to calculate the range of the intervals of the cycles, and that is just by subtracting the maximum time, the minimum time, and that's the range of times. Then we calculate the average by the summatory of times divided by the number of measurements. That, as we saw in the last slide, can be 10 or 5 according to the time of the cycle. And when I say time of the cycle, I'm talking about when we are analyzing a process There are some activities, as we saw on the diagrams, and each activity can be considered a cycle. So we analyze the time that it takes to perform a specific activity. Then we go to the job evaluation. And the objective of this evaluation is the evaluation of the work rhythm. We need to determine from the time spent by the observed operator the standard time that an average skilled worker, that is why we need workers that have already passed their learning curve, can maintain while performing a task, with which it will be possible to calculate productivity indicators that serve as a basis for planning and controlling production. So we need to establish this standard time so we can better analyze the whole production. Later, you're going to take production planning courses, and you need this information to have a better planning of production. Okay, so when we are analyzing an operator, we need to establish his ability. And this ability is defined as the use when following a given method. The observer must evaluate and qualify within 6 classes the skill displayed by the operator. And this is kind of tricky, kind of difficult, because we need to define if it's a bad operator, if it's regular, if it's medium, if it's okay, if it's excellent, or if it's skillful. And this skill rating is the translator to its percentage equivalence, with ranges from 15% to minus 22%. So to define if an operator is between one of these 6 levels, we need to define the average time, so we can know if it's real bad or it's skillful. It's really lesser time that it needs. So first of all, we need the average time. The effort also, it's qualifying the result of the activity. It's a demonstration of the willingness to work efficiently, that you really want to work efficiently. Effort is representative of the speed with which the skill is applied and is normally controlled to a high degree by the operator. So this is qualifying, not quantifying. We need a lot of observation to define if the effort is good enough. Consistency, another qualifier. It's the degree of variation in elapsed time, minimum and maximum, in relation to the average, judged according to the nature of the operations and the skill and effort of the operator. It is important if an element such as lighting affects the conditions, it should be not considering during the calculation of the supplements. So the consistency is if I am able to perform the same activity in the same amount of time. That will be consistency. So if it takes 30 seconds every time I do it, I'm being consistent. But we need to establish that the conditions in which I am working are the same. That's why it says there that if lighting or the temperature changes, then we cannot measure consistency because the conditions in the environment were different. So we need the same conditions so we can make sure this consistency of making the same activity in the same amount of time. That's why we need to talk about conditions. Are those circumstances that affect only the operator and not the operation. Elements that can affect working conditions include temperature, ventilation, monotony, lighting, noise, etc. That will be studied in this course when we review the ergonomics. But here we just need to identify what those conditions were and measure them. What was the amount of lighting, the what was the temperature, if there were some ventilation or air movement, what was that, uh, and of course identify if the if it's a repetitive activity that can produce monotony, and if there was noise, also measure the amount of noise that it were in that activity. The pace of work, the standard performance of a qualified worker is assumed as 100 over 100 of performance, that you have 100% of pace work. To this assessment, the values of the table must be added according to the ability, effort, condition, and consistency perceived by the person responsible for the study. Once this consideration has been made, it will be determined if an operator executed the operation of 125%, 120, 95, 88, etc. So what it says here is that in order for you to measure the pace of work, you need to measure all the elements before, and then define if, according to the whole set of workers, the worker that you are measuring work at 125%. That means that the average is the 100%, and it was better than that. So, but it was better than that by a quarter. So you give it those 24% more. If it was less than that what was expected, then it was working at a pace of 95. How can you do that? By measuring two things: the amount of product produced in the same amount of time, or the time that it took for him or her to perform the activity. And it's an easy way to measure what was the percentage that you observe. If he produced 25% more than the average, then he was working at a 125% uh, uh, pace. If he did 12% less than the average, then the worker was paced at 88%. Okay. Finally, we need to establish the supplements. Some things that we need to identify in the process, such as personal aspect, special from the activity. Some of them are from fatigue, and we need to calculate them to establish the standard time. There are resting supplements, contingency supplements. So when we are talking about resting supplements, there are basic fatigues elements, and that give us 4% more in the time measured. So if it took 100 seconds, then we need to add 4 seconds more for the fatigue supplements. If there were some personal necessities, just as going to the bathroom, we need to add 5% more of time to the activity. So if there were some eventually some problems that we couldn't identify previously, we need to add 6%. If when we were observing the process, we noticed that a lot of problems happened that we couldn't preview, then we need to add 6%. Okay. And what we do is we have a time measure. This is the average of all the time measured. Then there are the supplements calculated. Here are 12% of supplements from this quantity. So we add to the average time measured the time of the supplements, and we establish the standard time. So in this case, it was 0.63 as average time, and 0.076 of the supplements, and we have a total of 0.706 of time. And finally, we can calculate how many products per hour we can produce. With this time in an hour, we can have 85 products. Okay. And finally, we are going to talk a little bit about the learning cube. Okay. Our performance and the number of trials or attempts at learning. It's the times that I have to produce, or in other way, how many units did I produce to get a better performance. So this curve represents the performance, but we are going to be analyzing the time that it takes for us to perform an activity. And it's a line showing the relationship between the production time or cost per unit and the number of consecutive production units. Describes the degree of success achieved during learning over time. And here is an example. The first time that I produced, my time was this, then it decreased, and it consistently were decreasing until it get into a safe zone. Here is lesser to no variation, and in the first phase, there is some resistance or frustration because I'm not doing things well enough. Then I get to my incompetence level. It doesn't sound so nice, but it's better than resistance and frustration. It means that, okay, I'm not good enough, but I want to improve. That is my incompetence level. Then there is a line when I have a reasonable competition, and there is a point where the learning ends, and that point is where the times are per unit have little to no variation, and the line is stable. Of course, to measure this, we need the average time to know if we are doing things well enough. And now we are going to talk a little bit about the activity that we are going to perform to analyze all of this material. And what I recommend is that you have a Lego model, a small Lego model of 60 parts per model, and you are going to assemble it 5 times. And you are going to measure the time that it takes to perform each activity. If you ever assembled a Lego model, you'll notice that it has a manual of how to assemble the toy, and it show us what parts you need to assemble in each of the activities that we need to perform. For example, here are some steps. Step 1 and 2, I divided, I grouped the whole process into phases of 2 steps. So to do step 1 and 2, the first time it took me 9.75 seconds, the second time 9.6, the third time 9.5, 9.5 in the fourth, and in the fifth time. That give me an average of 9.57 with a standard deviation of 0.109. There are 2 supplements that I identify. Supplement number 2, that it's for the posture that you need to be doing in assembling it, and of the concentration. And this is a 2% by the first supplement, and another 2% for the concentration. So it's for posture and for concentration. And that gives me 4% more than this average time. So I need a standard time of 9.95 to perform this activity. And this represents graphically the 5 times that I perform the activity. So I can see clearly where how my learning curve behaves, and when the learning part stopped, and what's the time expected for me, and how many units do I need to achieve the learning of a process. So in both cases, up until 3 units produced, I was able to get my best performance. And this is what you're going to do in this week. So this will be for this video. It was a little bit long, but I think that it's what needed to better understand the diagrams and the learning curve. So thank you very much. I hope you find this video useful, and that you could learn something new in this occasion. So see you in the next video. Bye bye.